harness a lot of energy and wake up the muscles with isometric contraction. So Charles Atlas was right when he said he did that dynamic tension, and a lot of it was based on those same things, just tensing up without actually adding a lot of weight. So that's another thing. Any specific questions?
Oh, so is that kind of like isometric?
It is, yeah. So the definition of isometric is contraction without movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be,
Oh, okay.
and then you could, and here's like the cross between, because you can make it really robotic, which is, you want it to be natural. So there's some people that can tense at the right time. So if we go back to just like some of those standing ones I mentioned that could be in place of crunching, I could keep, like I'm tensing things, but not if I do that same thing, if I really tense, that should look different. What I'm doing, I'm kind of like choppy and robotic. But if I lightly tense, or they'll call it, there's different ways where it's like a gentle contraction or a relaxed contraction. I know that sounds kind of the oxymoron thing, but if you get the right amount of contraction and movement at the same time, it can flow, but it's still under control. If you get too much contraction and you get too choppy. But there is a way to do isometric contractions where you're isometrically contracting things, but you're adding a dynamic movement, like the squatting, or even just like lifting one leg up. And you're looking pretty, good flow with it, but you're still contracting things at the right time and the right sequence. That can help too. So it's more of a dynamic isometric. And again, it's the oxymoron because you're adding movement, but isometric means you're not moving, but you're isometric contracting something but moving other parts. The other quick thing, so to expand upon that, and this overflows a little bit with some of the stuff we talked about with other circuit training, where if you take a simple sit to stand, which is basically like a squat, and I'm doing this from a pretty high table, there's typically three main ways to do it. You can stand up, sit down with both legs on the ground. Then you can do one leg. So basically I have one leg off the ground, one foot, for balance, because I know some people are like, whoa, I'm not trying that, because safety's first. I know, always safe and pain free. But you can have, or we'll set up where we have two chairs, one on either side of a person, one leg's up, or maybe even they're holding on to both chairs and one like toe touch, so they're putting most of the weight on one leg. The reason why that's important, and then of course we want to have them do each side. We look at both legs, and the typical question, I try to ask this before I move on too quickly or so on, I will have them do that and say, do you feel equal on each leg? Most of the people, whether they're equal or not, whether it turns out they are or not, they'll say, yeah, I'm equal. When we test them, there's almost always a good side and a not so good side.
Yeah.
Where they're either very off balance, or if it's severe enough deficit, I always use kind of the old-fashioned scale. One side's really good and one side's not good at all. I've had people like almost as perfect as could be on one side and literally couldn't raise up on the other. And this is where the overlap of some of the exercise training we talked about before. I'm convinced now, until proven otherwise, if you train that better side first, the stronger. So better just means stronger, less pain, more flexible, better balanced. Just overall, the side you would rely on, as another way to put it. If you had to pick which is if you're in a contest for stand up on one leg, which would you pick? You'd probably pick that stronger side, that better side. If you do the better side first, usually a set of 10, sometimes a couple sets of 10, then recheck the other side. Almost always, that stronger side will help the weaker. And in typical therapy terms and training, and they started, at first I thought, okay, and I start to compartmentalize. I thought, oh, that makes sense in the therapy world. But part of me, I'm still selfish, and I want to do things to better myself as well as other people. I thought, well, does that work out in regular strength training? And the more and more research that comes out, it does. And I've tested people that, whether it's pressing overhead or bench press, especially if you use like dumbbells and you can do one side over the other. You test one side, and I had one person that was just having trouble with the shoulder. So he came in, and we just used a total gym, which is kind of like we're inclined here. And he does inclined bench press, which is basically a bench press that's 45-degree angles roughly, and he presses kind of like a bench press like this. Well, his one shoulder was bothering him, and he could press 60 pounds fairly easily on the good side. This side, you gave him 30, and it was just could barely do it. So roughly we called that, it's like 50% different. He was 60 pounds at 30. By training the 60 pound, I think we did use 2 sets of 5 in that case. And then immediately rechecking with the 30 pound, he got better. And then we're like, oh, I wonder if that carried over. So 60 on the left side helped him with 30 on the right. Then we quickly gave him like a 40, that even got better. And after a couple sets of doing the left, doing that over, he could do the 60 pounds with the right. So sometimes you get a fast responder. Most of us are going to be what we'll call moderate responders. It's like the bell-shaped curve. 75 or 8% of us are going to fall within that standard deviation of each other, but we're going to respond moderately well. And there's always an outlier. There's the top 12% and the bottom 12. Some won't get any response. You can do that for years and years and nothing will really happen. And you get some. He was somewhat of a fast responder, I'd say. But this can happen in kind of slower motion. Over months of training, you can get better. Just keep that in mind, because that's a big thing, whether it's back pain, core training, shoulder pain, it doesn't even matter, the body part. Train that better side. I've had people that have had severe back pain and they came in and they're like, oh, what are you gonna do? I don't even know why I'm here, I'm in pain. But that's always a good time to come, because most people think, I don't want to do anything, I'm in pain, I'll just, I don't know, lie there or sit there in pain. And I ask, oh, what happened? And the person goes, why? Just threw something, oh, like that, oh, it hurt. And that, so I looked at it, and this is real obvious it wasn't obvious to me at the time, but now it's like, oh, that makes sense. Where right leg forward and right arm throw in the trash. So the opposite of that is basically left leg forward, left arm throw in the trash. So at that point, it's hard to do the full evaluation where like, oh, let's check this and do all these movements. So in that case, I just had the person, I said, okay, well, that's what caused the pain. Have you ever do the other side? He goes, no, I'm right-handed, I throw it away that way. Just for the time, I always ask people, what if you did the opposite side? So he did that opposite side, and there's always that, you can always tell when there's, because he looked, he's like, and then he did it again. Usually if someone does something again, it's probably better, because usually something hurts they don't want to do. If you touch a hot stove, you're not going to touch it again, typically, unless you, I don't know, are brain dead, or I don't know why you would do that a second time. But then he did that, and he's like, oh, that's weird. And he almost did what I was going to tell him to do, is like just do that multiple times. Well, and it's hard to say exactly. I mean, there is research behind this, and there's lots of abstracts, and not just abstracts, but it's a quick read of these research articles. But just the neurological carryover effect and why everything's connected. So when you do an opposite thing, it carries over to the other side that's hurt. Sometimes better than others. So I'm never going to say this works magically well all the time. We've gotten good results most of the time, but in various degrees. But then when he went back and rechecked, he's like, oh, and you could see it. Usually the speed of the movement gets a little better, the overall range improves, just the quality of motion looks better. So in that case, doing the opposite side is a powerful component to help, whether it's training the core or helping with back pain. Just doing everyday things. Because usually where people injure their back, it's almost always, I'm going to say it 80, 90% of the time, it's, oh, I picked up the pen, or I picked up a tissue paper. I've heard that a million times. A paper clip. It's something, it's very light. Because heavy, and I know this thing weighs like 50 pounds, and we pick it up a lot in here, if you're going to pick something heavy, especially if you know it's heavy, I mean, you brace, and heaviness teaches better patterns. Someone said it better than that, but it's to that extent, where if you have something really light you take for granted. You're like, oh, it's only a pillow. I'm gonna go, and even if it's anything, you're not saying this to yourself, but roughly if you pick it up in bad form, you're like, who cares? It's only a pillow. That's when injuries happen more often. Or the straw that breaks the camel's back or hurts your back in that case. It's usually when you're not aware and you pick something up light. So I always tell people, if it's a pen or piece of paper, pretend it's a 100-pound piece of paper, or if relative to what's heavy for them, it's a 30-pound piece of paper. Because a 30-pound, you probably pick it up. You would pick it up using better form, like those 20 strong muscles on each side that we were referencing earlier. We have 20 strong, longer muscles on each femur to the pelvis. We have 9 smaller ones, the low back. Most people, they totally ignore that they even have those 20 muscles, and they'll pick something up with their 9 or 18 weak muscles when you count both sides, and they'll almost ignore the 40 muscles that could help them. Or if they just simply did that little brace that we're talking about that might replace the crunch, and just pick up something, whether it's heavy or light, that is very protective. And along that same line, one of the best stories, I bring this up a lot because it's just kind of funny, and it demonstrates this whole, where one lady came, and it was, I think it was her last visit. No, it was the second to last. And she came in and basically said, oh, because I was doing pressure points and those seemed to be helping. I was doing it, or showed her some other stuff like this, different movement patterns and different planes of motion. And she said, oh yeah, what you've done has not helped me. Which I always find odd when someone's like, oh, you didn't help me at all. I'm like, well, why would you come back if I wasn't helping? God, there's enough people that never call us and they don't come back. And you came back, and what she meant by that is the stuff, like the pressure points, the exercises, didn't really help her, but the one thing we said from day one, because she was a teacher, and she kept saying she does everything, and she's always going like this to this. So everything was like left to right. And I said, well, could you ever do it right to left? I mean, even at Walmart, they have the checkers, if you notice, I think it's the 2-hour shifts. So if their station's set up from right to left, checking you out, doing all that stuff, they'll switch them to the next station, which has to go left to right. Because they've even learned, and Walmart's very smart, they know how to make money and sell a lot of products and get a lot of people in and out. Well, they're trying to keep their people that they work for healthy and happy, because you want less work comp claims, you want less people complaining, all that stuff. So all she did was start to change her patterns. That, and I agree with her, it always makes the biggest impact. You can push and do the greatest techniques in the world all day long, and that's good, and I guess it kind of makes us feel good in our profession, like we're doing something, and it does help, but what really helps is changing the movement patterns. If you can instill that, that's like the old saying of, if we push on someone, that's like feeding them fish for a meal, but if you teach them how to fish, they can feed themselves for as long as they want, I guess, and as long as they eat fish, like fish, but that's where I think that concept, so that's, and I really think that opposite is one more step, and how simple that was but I had to pay lots of money, take lots of courses to learn, oh, do the opposite. That's what it boils down to. There is more to it than that, but roughly that does help a lot. I tell people all the time, if this bothers you, they're like, oh, it hurts. If this doesn't, do the opposite side and then recheck. It can't hurt. All you've done is waste a minute of your time if it doesn't work. But usually there's a little carryover, like, oh, there is something to that. People with back pain I had that were golfers. One guy golfed a lot, and he was right-handed, so he did a lot of that over and over, 4 days a week. Somehow his schedule, I specifically remember this, he always golfed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and did not golf Friday through Sunday. Part of it was just his schedule, and he did other things, and the way it was set up. But part of it, too, is I think he liked it so much, he did so much in a row, he needed at least a few days to recover. Well, it started that he couldn't recover in those 3 days, so even Monday when he went back, he's like, oh, it just bothers my back. And he said he would golf sometimes 18 holes in a day, sometimes 36, because he just liked it. He golfed all day long. Well, that's a lot of right to left torque. I thought, oh, I'll be fancy and I'll do all this stuff and look good. He's like, I'm kind of better. Yeah, all right. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't you try this? Like, kind of pulling for ideas. And I'm like, in between holes, if you're always going right to left, just do a few. Even if you pick up the club and go left to right. And and then that did it. So something sometimes as simple as that made a big difference. So he counteracted. I believe it's like a 10% rule. I'm somewhat making that up, but it's somewhat of an educated guess on research and practical experience. Where if you do, just for the math of it, if I do, 100 steps and I'm going for 100 forward lunges, let's take that. So people do lunges and like, yeah, I'm strengthening my legs and it's good results, but it's hurting me. Well, if I do 100 forward, you should do at least 10, which is 10% of 100, backwards. I know one guy, I heard a story, he'd run marathons, he'd run like 100 miles a week or more. That's a lot of mileage that wears down, and running kind of almost, no matter how great you try to stand up straight, it kind of pulls you this way. So 10% roughly, that's what he came up with. It was somewhere in that neighborhood. So for every 100 miles he went forward, he did 10 miles backwards. Not all in a row. He mixed it up where it's like maybe on a 10-mile run day, he would do half mile backwards at the beginning and half mile at the end. So he kind of sandwiched it in there. But at 10%, he unwound some of the high volume of the one direction. So we see it a lot where if people are driving and they're always looking this way, if you do a lot of driving, you might want to do a few things to the right just to counteract that. Something as simple as that seems to make some of the biggest differences. So these last few minutes, I'll get any questions or comments, or I can do whatever, or it'll be good. Yes.
Of all the different machines upstairs, are there any that you do recommend in terms of building core strength?
If I had to pick a machine?
If you had to.
If I had to. So there's no non-machine stuff. I'm just making it clear, so
it sounds like you're saying maybe you would recommend the machine.
Ultimately that would be the choice. And I will admit that has become, I know we all have our biases. If that is a bias, which I'll say it is, I would say, yeah, none. And I am coming from, that's all I worked out from age 12 to about, 28, 30 machines. Like I had to find a machine. If I chose a hotel, I'd always call, what kind of machines do you have in your lobby? What an obsessive, crazy, maniac person that was. Now, I'm the complete opposite. As long as there's something, we've done pull-ups on that hotel
rooftop.
Well, we had to almost jump up, and we did them above the stairs, and if you fell, you'd fall kind of far, and you had to jump. That might not be the safest thing. That
Which is bad for the back.
doesn't. Let me change that.
Don't use the shower rod.
Yeah, let me use a different scenario. But as long as you have like
Sturdy desk.
where you can do inverted row things. If I had to pick, what I would do, truly one of the best core from a machine would be similar to the total gym. It's not exactly lying down flat, but where you're kind of flat for the most part, and you do like a leg press. And I know it's not what you'd expect, because most people think, oh, what's up, down? It's working the larger muscles, but your back's supported, and technically you could still contract lightly the abdominals as you go up and down. So it's basically like this, but on a machine.
Right.
If it's done properly, and I mentioned this earlier, where it's called the pullover. Nautilus came up with that. I think they still call it the pullover because you start here, and you push down. If you maintain good stability through the trunk and you work that, that's good because the lats tie into the low back, and that's a good, what we call a top-down motion. So the lats come from here, and they actually attach right by your rotator cuff muscles in your shoulder. But they come down and go into this big, thick fascia connective tissue area in the low back. So that can be pretty protective. Basically, we talk in terms of squat, push, and pull, and that would be like a squatting motion. That would be more of a pulling motion. The push, again, if you stabilize and extend, you could do like a chest press. You could also say pull downs I'd probably put in there too, and maybe a rowing. A little bit more dominant on the pull because we get so much pushing, and we get enough pushing things that you would almost use the pulling and the more squatting of the squat, push, and pull. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm so anti-machine, 'cause I'm truly not, but if I had my choice, and I've gone full cycle or pull-ups, push-ups.
When I do the machines here, I tend to work through as many of the machines as I can get to, and I do one set of 12 reps with as much weight as I can tolerate in that range. Is that good or bad?
So I think the good part of it is if you do one set, 12 reps, and I assume you gradually progressed up to the heaviest weight over time, because at first your 12 reps were at 50 and now you might be at 100 or whatever over a given amount. Technically, from a time efficiency standpoint, and that's where it all started when Nautilus came up with their one set to failure. It was a whole body routine of 10 to 20 exercises, mostly machines, because obviously Arthur Jones, who invented Nautilus, had Nautilus machines now. So he was going to promote his product, of course, and he's like, oh, you need all machines, but he threw some free weights in there too. And it was one set of 8 to 12 reps, so you follow that exactly, to what they call momentary muscular failure, which most people, I mean, there's different ways of doing that. Technically, you go until that 12th rep, you can just
Until you get tired.
barely get, and then whoa. And then the next time, if you could get at least 8, you would increase the weight. If you got less than 8, you chose too high of a weight. If you got more than 12, it was too light. So as long as you got somewhere between 8 and 12, you were good. And you always try to go to momentary muscular failure. You train like that 2 to 3 times a week, and that would be good. So overall, that is a good. I wouldn't change a whole lot that way. If you don't go to failure, you could and probably should do 2 to 3. The standard is 4 sets between 6 and 12 reps. If you look at all this research, and this is where I get, now my obsessive compulsiveness is not trying to find places with good machines in a hotel, but it's what's this ultimate routine. We see all these different people of all backgrounds and ages and stuff. And if you don't go to failure, I always have to say that, big if, then you would choose something you would do 4 sets of. So again, we think squat, push, pull. If you did 4 sets of some type of squatting motion, 4 sets of a pushing, and 4 sets of a pulling. That could come in the form, so you're already getting it, where you might do a couple different ways of pulling, and a couple different machines of pushing. So you might do 1 set of each, but it might be up to 4 different sets, just different machines versus the same one. Or you could do the more plain vanilla routine where you would do 3 exercises, the same 3 machines, all 4 sets each. That would be the more limited variety, where you could have more variety. So either way, the research, if you go by research, and some of those, now they have meta-analysis studies, which are 30 to 50, 60 research articles, and they really try to synthesize what really produces results, and that's what they claim is the best. But if you go to failure, because I've trained both ways, you don't need much at all. You need a minimum of a few exercises, usually 3 to 5, and you train to absolute failure. The only problem with that is psychologically, it's tough because every time you go, you know you have to put in some high effort. You can only do that so often in your life, and eventually you almost have to kind of back down on the intensity because it's just very high intense. But,
Okay, thanks.
yep.
The only machine I use upstairs is the bicycle. I have bad knee, whatever. But I do water aerobics 6 days a week here. And one of the instructors is, I call her my boot camp lady.
Okay.
She's very good.
Good.
And a lot of the type of exercises that you were talking about, she does within the routines that we do in there.
It's good. I always like people that do what I do, right? They all do
Yeah.
that. Well, I was a
Well, I kind of have observed, I've been upstairs doing the bike like 3 months now, and I observe these people that are there my half hour that I'm riding the bike, that are doing all these machines and all these reps, and in the 3 months I haven't seen a change in them.
Change in their routine?
In
Or in their-
them,
in
because
them?
you would think that in their body structure, something would have happened. Nothing has.
Yeah. So it's a scenario, and that's interesting you brought that up. Sometimes we talk about that here where I use an example, and I usually pick on the bike for whatever reason.
Oh,
Just-
dear.
It could be it's not even, and I'm not even trying to, it could be anything. Anything that you do the same reps and sets, because I guarantee you they did the same order, the same sequence, probably the same speed, and almost everything. Maybe they've changed something, but it's usually not intentional or conscious. They just change because they really want to, but they think, well, we're creatures of habit. So usually if you do the same thing, and the key, and we talked about this in some of the fat loss, whether it's nutritionally based or especially exercise based, you want to be efficient enough so you don't make it unsafe. That's why the whole safety pain-free rule.
They haven't had any fat loss. I've looked at them for
Correct.
3 months.
So they're so efficient that they're getting no result because they're not pushing in. There's no what they call an inroad. You have to have an inroad to your physiology, meaning if you walk 3 miles a day, if you do the same pattern, eventually your returns, your results are zero. Or your maintenance, you might maintain, I should say no result, but you've maintained your results. There's no increase, there's no extra fat loss or muscle building.
But it's still better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, yes. Oh yeah, you always have to say that. And I say that a lot, but then when I really think about that, of course it's better than nothing. Anything, I mean, if you scratch your head enough times, that's gonna get some exercise. But if you truly for efficiency, so this is what I've spent the last almost 20 years now, like getting how efficient and effective can I make all of these exercise programs, you have to change something. Even if they change the order that they do those exercises in, that would help them. What's even more important, that's a minor change that would result in a minor little result. The biggest result is what we talked about. You either have to go to failure or increase enough of the sets and reps. And then of course that's still 20% of the equation, I believe. The other 80% is proper nutrition. Because they're either eating the same or more.
I can color them.
Yeah. 80, like I said, and I don't know if that's the exact ratio, but it makes sense. A high portion of it is nutrition. And I always think of my friend, and I used to think, anyway, at first I understood it, but I didn't want to believe it. I just didn't want to believe that she did yoga a couple times a week and walked several miles a day with her kids, and she just pushed them in the cart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she went from pretty chubby, lost like 30 pounds, and then she was not unhealthy rips, not like the bodybuilder females that have a deeper voice than me and more hair under their armpits than me, but that's not a good picture there, but she did that. That's all she did was walk and do yoga, but her nutrition changed. That 80% that the nutrition changed, oh my God, she looked like she lifted weights. I'm like, do you lift? I had to ask her. I'm like, she's like, no, I don't touch weights. She goes, I do my yoga, which is like lifting weights. It's your body weight. And she walked. And now she did progress the walking because she started doing hills and changing like those people up there. If they changed something and made it a little more intensity, that's the key factor. You have to make it more intense. The nutrition is what did it for her. And she looked like she could rip a tree in half. I mean, she was so strong. She might have beat you to the.
No, I've already asked one, so go ahead.
Okay.
I'll ask a second.
Oh, you were talking about nutrition, and I was looking at here, you're supposed to eat 20 to 30 grams of high-quality protein within the first hour of each day. I mean, some of us are on the slow road to don't eat until like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And we got so, but that's a lot of protein,
I
right?
know. It
First,
is,
that's
so-
what's with that? Because I mean, if that's going to help us get toned and lose weight or something, we might find something that's 20 to 30 grams. What is that?
So 2 answers on that, and I'll make it brief.
Smoked
One is
salmon right off the bat before you call.
you could. So I want actually the more direct answer
Yeah,
is,
go ahead.
and I have changed a little bit. Again, this is like some of this is like one size fits all, and of course that never
Is that
works.
20 to 30 grams?
They've shown
Not the
in
sugar, those.
people, females and males,
Oh,
70 years and older.
Okay.
That's why it's a group that is very similar to who we see a lot of. Is they didn't even exercise. They took people that exercised and they had 40 grams of protein per meal 3 days a week, and they gained muscle whether they exercised or not. So what they found is that up to a degree, and I'm not saying this for everyone, but somewhere in that 20 to 40 grams, and I always believe the minimal effective dosage. So if you can get it with 10 grams, fine. But 20 seems to be this kind of magic number. The reason why we put it in the first half hour is people that were on a program in one research study that was pretty solid, that broke their plateau. So when they started adding 20 grams protein first thing within an hour, it set the tone for the day. They were less likely to overeat and less likely to eat the bad stuff, sugars and